Welcome back to The Spoken Word. My name is Travis, and I'm your host. We've been talking about giants for a little bit, and today I would like to finish that off with one last section. There is a tradition that says that demons, like the beings that Jesus and the apostles encounter in the New Testament, are in fact the spirits of dead giants. So where does this come from? Let's find out. Okay, so let's talk about demons and their connection to giants. Now, first let me preface this. There is nothing in the biblical text that tells us anything about the origin of demons. Just like we don't get any information about where the serpent came from, we also don't get any information about where demons come from or anything else. That is nowhere in the biblical story. Some scholars will point to various places like the Rephaim, which we've connected with giants, are also connected with spirits of the dead in certain places. But all of this is very circumstantial. There's no large exposition in the Bible that says, by the way, this is where angels and demons and whatever else come from. We don't get any of that information. Okay? So what we're going to be talking about today is not necessarily something that you should go and, carve onto the walls of your church and put it into, your articles of faith or your mission statement or something like that. I only wanted to talk about this because, one, I find it interesting, but secondarily, this is part of the cultural background and the theological milieu in which the New Testament itself is written. So, there is a tradition within Second Temple Jewish literature, by which I mean books that are not part of the Bible, but they are texts that were written by Jewish authors living before and around the time of Jesus, after the destruction of the first temple of Jerusalem, and during the time of the second temple up until its destruction in AD 70 by the Romans. This is what some biblical scholars will also call the intertestamental period. It's the couple hundred years that lie between the closing of the events of the Old Testament and the events of the New Testament. Let me give you a quick history lesson so that you can see what I'm talking about. The nation of Israel is ultimately going to get broken up into two kingdoms. One is the kingdom of Israel in the north, the other is the kingdom of Judah in the south. The kingdom of Israel is going to get wiped out by the Assyrians. The kingdom of Judah in the south is eventually going to be conquered by the Babylonians. The Babylonians are going to deport a bunch of these people living in Judah, which is where we get the name Jew from. So a lot of Jews are deported to Babylon. Babylon is ultimately conquered by the Persian Empire. And it's under the reign of the Persian Empire that the Jews are allowed to go back to Jerusalem and the land of Judah. During this period is when the close of the Old Testament happens. You have books like Ezra and Nehemiah where the second temple itself is being built. Jerusalem's walls are being rebuilt. This new temple is being built because the Babylonians had destroyed the first temple that was built by Solomon, all these kinds of things. And then the story just kind of ends. And then you fast forward and you open up your New Testament, and all of a sudden the Romans are in power. So there is about 300 years of time that has passed between the close of the Old Testament and the opening of the New Testament. You have the fall of the Persian Empire at the hands of Alexander the Great. And then you have the fall of Alexander's empire, if you will, after his death and the fall of his generals and all these other things. And then you have the rise of Rome. And that ultimately is where the New Testament leaves us. Okay, so during this period between essentially the Persian Empire and the rule of the Romans, that is where you have this other literature that is being written. And that is what scholars will call Second Temple Jewish literature. By the way, you could actually call the New Testament itself Second Temple Jewish literature, because with the exception of anything that was written by Luke, who many think was a Gentile. Everything else was written by Jews living in the Second Temple period. So most of your New Testament is Second Temple Jewish literature. So there's a lot of other writings that are happening by these people that are living prior to the time of Jesus. And they're taking their Bible and they're doing new things with it. This is like popular theology of the Second Temple Jewish period. Just like you could go down to the bookstore today and read lots of things that are written by Christians about the Bible, but those things are not themselves the Bible. Okay? So that's kind of a category that you could probably put this literature into. This literature has been with the Judeo-Christian tradition for over 1,000 years. This is not something that somebody cooked up in the 1800s. It fell out of the sky, whatever, something like that, and is trying to pass off as ancient literature. We have these texts going all the way back into the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were written hundreds of years before Christ in some cases. So these are, in fact, ancient texts that are dated to this period. So anyway, all of that being said, these texts do explore the origin of what we know in the New Testament as demons. And they do a really interesting thing. They actually connect these demons to the giants, specifically the giants that were living before the Great Flood. Okay? So we're going to be reading from 2 of these Second Temple Jewish books. The first is the book of 1st Enoch, and the second is the book of Jubilees. Let me give you a little bit of a background on both of them first. So 1st Enoch is cast as a prophetic, apocalyptic kind of oracle that is put out there as being something that Enoch, one of Noah's ancestors, saw and had visions and whatever else. So it's kind of like prophetic, apocalyptic literature. Think like Ezekiel, think Revelation, things like that. So that's kind of its genre. And then the book of Jubilees is essentially a retelling of the Torah. It's passed off as being in the setting of Moses being up on the mountain, and there's this angel that he's speaking with, and the angel is telling Moses all of these stories. And the book of Jubilees is really obsessed with the calendar, but one of the things that it does besides that is that it tries to integrate material from the Enochic tradition, so material that's in 1st Enoch and literature like that, and it tries to fuse that material with material that's in the Torah. So sometimes you'll see things that sound very much like the Torah, things that sound very much like Genesis and Exodus and so forth, but then there's this other side where it borrows materials from the traditions of what we find in 1st Enoch, and it expands in other interesting kind of ways. Okay, so I just want to read from these 2 sources just to give you a review of some of the things that were floating around in people's hands at the time of Jesus. So we're going to start with 1st Enoch, and you can read the overall story that I'm going to be summarizing and touching in bits here in 1st Enoch chapter 6 through 16. The chapters of 1st Enoch are generally not very long, so that sounds a lot longer than it is. But here we go. So, background for the story. We've talked about the sons of God coming to earth, mating with women, making giants, all this kind of stuff. This book has that as its background to this story that we're talking about here. So it's talked about the sons of God who Enoch calls the Watchers. The Watchers have come down. They have taken wives for themselves and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so this is 1st Enoch 7 that we're going to start with. The descent of the Watchers is in 1st Enoch 6, but this is going to be 7. So chapter 7, verse 1, it says, "These and all the others," so all of the Watchers, "with them took for themselves wives from among them such as they chose. And they began to go into them and to defile themselves through them, and to teach them sorcery and charms, and to reveal to them the cutting of roots and plants. And they conceived from them and bore to them great giants. And the giants begot Nephilim, and to the Nephilim were born Eliud, and they were growing in accordance with their greatness. They were devouring the labor of all the sons of men, and men were not able to supply them. And the giants began to kill men and to devour them. And they began to sin against the birds and the beasts and the creeping things and the fish, and to devour one another's flesh. And they drank the blood. Then the earth brought accusation against the lawless ones. So the Watchers go on after this in chapter 8, and they teach humans knowledge that apparently they shouldn't have, like weaponry, sorcery, cosmetics, apparently, and all these kinds of things. Okay, and this knowledge kind of makes things worse. So then you come to chapter 9, the story goes on, and you have an interesting little interlude where there are 4 archangels that see all of this happening, and their names are Michael, who you can find in biblical texts. And we have Sariel and Raphael, neither of whom appear in biblical texts, but they're here. So these are 2 other archangels. And then we also have a 4th archangel, Gabriel, who all of us should recognize from the narrative of Jesus, right? Gabriel is the one who comes and announces both the birth of John the Baptist and the birth of Jesus. But Gabriel also shows up in the Old Testament. Okay, so Michael and Gabriel you can find in your Bible. These other 2 you can't. Okay? But anyway, these 4 archangels, they see all of the nonsense that's going down on planet Earth. And so they go to God and say, we need to do something about this. Okay, so God commissions these 4 archangels in chapter 10 to go on and do something about what's happening. So in chapter 10, we get a couple of interesting details about this commissioning. So Sariel gets commissioned to instruct Noah and tell him about the flood and all these other things that are going to happen. Raphael gets sent to bind Azazel, which is very similar to Azazel, who I believe we've talked about before in the Levitical context, the goat for Azazel, or the scapegoat. So this name is very interesting. That Azazel is one of the leaders of the fallen Watchers. And this is what it says about what Raphael is supposed to do. It says, "Go, Raphael, and bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the wilderness that is in Duadel. Throw him there, and lay beneath him sharp and jagged stones, and cover him with darkness, and let him dwell there for an exceedingly long time. Cover up his face, and let him not see the light." So it's very interesting that here we have this creature that is named Azazel, and he gets cast into the wilderness. And in Leviticus, you see the goat for Azazel in Hebrew, who is sent into the wilderness. So what to make of that is up to you. But it is an interesting little parallel. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is one and the same with the Azazel, which could simply mean wilderness or something like that in the Levitical narrative, but I just wanted to point out this is where some people get that connection. Okay, next up we have Gabriel, and he is commissioned to go and destroy the giants. It says, to destroy the sons of the Watchers from among the sons of men. Send them against one another in a war of destruction. Length of days they will not have, and no petition will be granted to their fathers in their behalf, that they should expect to live an everlasting life, nor even that each of them should live 500 years. Okay, so Gabriel is sent to go to the giants, the sons of the Watchers, and basically he's going to incite a civil war where they all fight each other. Okay, and then we have Michael, and he is commissioned to imprison Shemihaza and his associates and to destroy the giants. So Shemihaza is another one of the ringleaders of this group of fallen Watchers. And it says, "Go, Michael, bind Shemihaza and the others with him, who have mated with the daughters of men, so that they were defiled by them in their uncleanness. And when their sons perish and they see the destruction of their beloved ones, bind them for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, until the day of their judgment and consummation, until the everlasting judgment is consummated. Then they will be led away to the fiery abyss, and to the torture, and to the prison where they will be confined forever. And everyone who is condemned and destroyed henceforth will be bound together with them until the consummation of their generation. And at the time of the judgment, when I shall judge, they will perish for all generations. Destroy all the spirits of the half-breeds and the sons of the watchers, because they have wronged men. So you have these 4 archangels that are assigned to these various tasks. And we have these giants mentioned again and again as being the sons of the watchers. They call them half-breeds and all these kinds of things because they're mixed, right, between their angelic fathers and their human mothers. Okay? So that's all the context here. In the following chapters, Enoch kind of enters the story here, and he ends up kind of being this go-between between the watchers and God. And they kind of go back and forth, and he's kind of the messenger between them, and you have a number of exchanges that go back and forth. And then ultimately we get to chapter 15, and it says this: "But he answered and said to me," and this is God speaking to Enoch, "and I heard his voice, 'Fear not, Enoch, righteous man and scribe of truth. Come here and hear my voice. Go and say to the watchers of heaven, who sent you to petition in their behalf, you should petition in behalf of humans, and not humans in behalf of you. Why have you forsaken the high heaven, the eternal sanctuary, and lain with women, and defiled yourselves with the daughters of men, and taken for yourselves wives, and done as the sons of earth, and begotten for yourselves sons, giants? You are holy ones and spirits living forever. With the blood of women you have defiled yourselves, and with the blood of flesh you have begotten, and with the blood of men you have lusted. And you have done as they do, flesh and blood, who die and perish. Therefore I gave them women, that they might cast seed into them, and thus beget children by them, that nothing fail them on the earth." In other words, humans reproduce because we are mortals who die. And God is saying, why did you angelic beings go and lower yourselves to the level of mortals, right? So he goes on, "But you originally existed as spirits, living forever and not dying for all the generations of eternity. Therefore I did not make women among you. The spirits of heaven, in heaven is their dwelling. But now the giants who were begotten by the spirits and flesh, they will call them evil spirits on the earth, for their dwelling will be on the earth. The spirits that have gone forth from the body of their flesh are evil spirits. For from humans they came into being, and from the holy watchers was the origin of their creation. Evil spirits they will be on the earth, and evil spirits they will be called. The spirits of heaven, in heaven is their dwelling, but the spirits begotten on earth is their dwelling. And the spirits of the giants lead astray, do violence, make desolate, and attack and wrestle and hurl upon the earth and cause illness. They eat nothing, but abstain from food and are thirsty and smite. These spirits will rise up against the sons of men and against the women, for they have come forth from them. From the day of the slaughter and destruction and death of the giants, from the soul of whose flesh the spirits are proceeding, they are making desolate without incurring judgment. Thus they will make desolate until the day of the consummation of the great judgment, when the great age will be consummated. It will be consummated all at once." Okay, so let me simplify all of that. The logic here is that these giants are the product of heaven and earth in this unholy union. And the logic goes that if you're from earth, your spirit remains on earth. If you're from heaven, your proper dwelling is in heaven. So what happens if you're one of these half-breeds, as it calls it? What if you're one of these giants? Well, the judgment goes that since you are part heavenly and you're part earthly, you can't, upon death, go to Sheol, like a human spirit would, and you can't go to the dwelling of heaven, where heavenly beings are, because you're kind of stuck in this middle ground. So the judgment is that when the giants die, their spirits are locked here on earth. And the text gives them this title of evil spirits, which should be familiar to anyone who has read the New Testament. So that's the connection between the giants and these evil spirits, or what are also called demons by the New Testament. Okay, so that is a look at the material from Enoch and its story. Again, none of this is biblical, but we do know that the New Testament authors were influenced by content that was in Enoch. For example, all the business of these fallen watchers, angels, whatever you want to call them, the idea of them being like chained and bound until the day of judgment, all that kind of stuff. You can find echoes of that in some of Peter's writing, where he talks about spirits who are chained in eternal darkness and all this kind of stuff. In the book of Jude, there's also an explicit quotation from the book of Enoch. So we know that this is in the water. It doesn't mean that they thought that Enoch was therefore inspired or anything, but it's certainly part of their tradition that they were familiar with. Okay, so as I said earlier, this is pop culture, Jewish theological literature. Okay? So people are reading this, and when the authors of the New Testament are writing, they're probably lifting some material, some concepts from this. So it is interesting that the New Testament calls demons in a number of places evil spirits, which is the very title that Enoch gives these spirits of the dead giants. Now let's turn our attention to the book of Jubilees and just read some of its material. So we're going to jump around a little bit, but these passages are going to be coming from Jubilees 5, Jubilees 7, and Jubilees 10. So like I said earlier, the book of Jubilees is cast as being this extended director's cut of the Torah, essentially, that's given to Moses by an angel on Sinai. So sometimes whenever it uses words like we did such and such or whatever else, it's like, who is the we? Well, it would be this angel and his cohorts, apparently. Okay? So just wanted to throw that out there. That's what this text is in the context of. So this is from Jubilees 5, 1 through 2. And it says, "And it came to pass, when the children of men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, and the angels of God saw them on a certain year of this Jubilee, that they were beautiful to look upon. And they took themselves wives of all whom they chose, and they bare unto them sons, and they were giants. And lawlessness increased on the earth, and all flesh corrupted its way. Alike men and cattle and beasts and birds and everything that walketh on the earth, all of them corrupted their ways and their orders, and they began to devour each other. And lawlessness increased on the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of men was thus evil continually." That should sound very similar to Genesis 6's opening, with the exception, of course, that there's this extra bit of like what the beasts and the birds and everything did, and there's also this explicit connection where the sons of the union of the angels and the women, they're just called giants. Genesis 6 is a little bit more cryptic, and we talked about that. Okay. So that's the background. It's tracking with the Enochic tradition here. It's calling these sons of the angels or sons of the watchers, whatever term you want to use, it's calling them giants. You move on to chapter 7. This is verses 20 through 28. So the flood has happened by this point, and Noah is going to bring all of his sons together, and they're going to talk about things. So the flood has already happened by this point, and this is kind of what happens afterwards. And it says, "In the 28th Jubilee, Noah began to enjoin upon his sons' sons," so his grandchildren, "the ordinances and commandments, and all the judgments that he knew, and he exhorted his sons to observe righteousness, and to cover the shame of their flesh, and to bless their Creator, and honor father and mother, and love their neighbor, and guard their souls from fornication, and uncleanness, and all iniquity. For owing to these three things came the flood upon the earth, namely, owing to the fornication, wherein the watchers against the law of their ordinances mated, lusted after the daughters of men, and took themselves wives of all which they chose, and they made the beginning of uncleanness. And they begat sons, the Nephilim, They were all unlike, and they devoured one another. And the giants slew the Nephil, and the Nephil slew the Elijah, and the Elijah mankind, and one man another. And every one sold himself to work iniquity, and to shed much blood. And the earth was filled with iniquity. And after this they sinned against the beasts and the birds, and all that moveth and walketh on the earth. And much blood was shed on the earth, and every imagination and desire of men imagined vanity and evil continually. And the Lord destroyed everything from off the face of the earth, because of the wickedness of their deeds, and because of the blood which they had shed in the midst of the earth, he destroyed everything. And we were left, I and you, my sons, and everything that entered with us into the ark. And behold, I see your works before me, that ye do not walk in righteousness. For in the path of destruction ye have begun to walk. And ye are parting one from another, and are envious one of another. And, so it cometh, that ye are not in harmony, my sons, each with his brother. For I see, and behold, the demons have begun their seductions against you, and against your children, and now I fear on your behalf, that after my death ye will shed the blood of men upon the earth, and that ye too will be destroyed from the face of the earth. For whoso sheddeth man's blood, and whoso eateth the blood of any flesh, will all be destroyed from the earth. Okay, so here we see this kind of recounting of why the flood came, and it's connected to the sin of the watchers and the wickedness of the earth and all these things. And Noah is cast as being concerned about his descendants going and making history repeat itself and bring another disaster upon themselves. And in the midst of this, we have this interesting little phrase where Noah is concerned about these demons that are beginning their seductions on these descendants of his. So we move a little bit further on in the book, chapter 10, verses 1 through 13, and we get a second look at those demons and this problem. It says, And in the 3rd week of this Jubilee, the unclean demons began to lead astray the children of the sons of Noah, and to make to err and destroy them. Right? This is right out of the Enochic material, where it was saying that these evil spirits would basically war against the men and women of earth and all this kind of stuff, right? So Jubilees is riffing off of that here. It goes on, And the sons of Noah came to Noah their father, and they told him concerning the demons which were leading astray and blinding and slaying his sons' sons. And he prayed before the Lord his God and said, God of the spirits and of all flesh, who hast shown mercy unto me, and hast saved me and my sons from the waters of the flood, and hast not caused me to perish, as thou didst the sons of perdition. For thy grace hath been great towards me, and great hath been thy mercy to my soul. Let thy grace be lift up upon my sons, and let not wicked spirits rule over them, lest they should destroy them from the earth. But do thou bless me and my sons, that we may increase and multiply and replenish the earth. And thou knowest how thy watchers, the fathers of these spirits. So that's the connection here in Jubilees. It explicitly calls these demons the children of the watchers. Okay, so, and thou knowest how thy watchers, the fathers of these spirits, acted in my day. And as for these spirits which are living, imprison them and hold them fast in the place of condemnation, and let them not bring destruction on the sons of thy servant, my God. For these are malignant and created in order to destroy. And let them not rule over the spirits of the living. For thou alone canst exercise dominion over them. And let them not have power over the sons of the righteous from henceforth and forevermore. And the Lord God bade us to bind all. Okay, so that's the us here. This is the angel that's talking to Moses and recounting this story. So in other words, Noah prays this prayer, asking for deliverance for his children's children. And apparently the order comes down to bind all of these demons. And then it goes on, and this is the interesting little section here that's not present in the Enochic material. It says, And the chief of the spirits, Mastemah, came and said, Lord Creator, let some of them remain before me. So let some of the demons remain. And let them hearken to my voice, and do all that I shall say unto them. For if some of them are not left to me, I shall not be able to execute the power of my will on the sons of men, for these are for corruption and leading astray before my judgment, for great is the wickedness of the sons of men. And he said, Let the 10th part of them remain before him, and let 9 parts descend to the place of condemnation. And one of us he commanded that we should teach Noah all their medicines, for he knew that they would not walk in uprightness, nor strive in righteousness, and we did according to all his words. All the malignant evil ones we bound in the place of condemnation, and a 10th part of them we left that they might be subject before Satan on the earth. And we explained to Noah all the medicines of their diseases, together with their seductions, how he might heal them with herbs of the earth. And Noah wrote down all these things in a book as we instructed him concerning every kind of medicine. Thus the evil spirits were precluded from hurting the sons of Noah. Okay, so this Mastema figure, who is explicitly called Satan here, that is the figure in the book of Jubilees who is cast as being the chief adversary of God. Okay, so this is the character that in the New Testament kind of develops into simply being called Satan or the evil one or what have you. Okay, so same figure. So between first Enoch and the book of Jubilees, both of these are Second Temple Jewish works, and they cast demons as being the spirits of the giants that died during the flood. So why am I discussing any of this at all? As I mentioned earlier, I just find it interesting to get into the heads of the people that were living around the time of Jesus. But I think that there's also an interesting point here. In verse 6 here of Jubilees chapter 10, there was this phrase that I read, where in Noah's prayer, Noah asks God to let the demons not rule over the spirits of the living, for thou alone canst exercise dominion over them. So what I find interesting is that one of the chief things that Jesus does whenever he shows up and he begins his ministry, he starts doing exorcisms. He starts casting out demons. He commands them, right? He can exercise dominion at a whim over these things. So what's interesting is that if this is your background as a random Second Temple Jew who is out there, you're seeing Jesus, you're seeing demons being cast out, you're hearing them shrieking that he is the Son of God as they're cast out of people, all these kinds of things. If you have been swimming in these waters of Enoch and Jubilees and things like that, what you're going to be seeing is not just a exorcist, because we know that the Jews had that. Jesus asks the Pharisees at one point that if he's casting things out by the power of Beelzebub, by the power of the devil, then he asks rhetorically, well, who is it then that your sons cast demons out by, right? So we know that there are Jewish exorcists running around. But it's the effortlessness and the power with which he can command these things that I think to a Second Temple Jew would have actually been a claim of divinity. Jesus is acting like God. The other thing that's interesting is that, again, none of this has to be true. None of this should necessarily be taken as inspired Word of God truth. But I do think it's interesting that we see Moses and the Israelites confronting giants. We will later see Joshua confront giants. And we will see David confront giants. And I find it very interesting that Jesus is a figure who is cast as a new Moses based upon some passages that we'll see in Deuteronomy later. Moses predicts that there will be this other prophet that will come from among the Israelites who will be kind of like Moses. So Jesus is being cast as that kind of a prophet. He's a new Moses. His very name is Joshua. It's Yeshua, which through various translations becomes Jesus, which is a perfectly fine translation. But his name is Joshua. So just by his name, he's another Joshua. And he's being cast as the son of David. He's the new Davidic king. So I find it very interesting that all three of those guys faced giants and they could kill their flesh, but they couldn't destroy the spiritual remnant of the demons that were in front of them. But then Jesus comes on the scene as this new Moses / Joshua / David, and he, with nothing more than a word, is able to relieve people of this oppression by these spiritual entities. So, all of that being said, don't necessarily go and put this in the articles of faith of your church, please. But I do find it an interesting background that just adds a little bit more richness to whenever I read the Gospels and I read the stories of Jesus exercising dominion over demons, which the book of Jubilees says is something that only God can do. So that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate every single one of you. I know that I've been away for a little bit, but I do have one quick plug here at the end. I've begun teaching a class at my church, and that's where a lot of my time and studies have been going. And I do record those sessions. So if you go to wherever you get your podcasts and you look for Rediscover Bible Study, and it's stylized as RE // then the word discover, then Bible study is 2 separate words. If you go Google that or try to find it on your podcasts or what have you, if you're interested in the kinds of stuff that I do, then that is another resource that's out there for you to listen to and hopefully enjoy. But anyway, quick plug out of the way. From here, we're going to continue on our story. We're going to leave giants and all this other nonsense behind. We're going to keep reading the trajectory of the Torah and start heading into the promised land. But first, there's going to be a detour. So with that, I will see you next time. God bless.